Anguttara Nikaya 941, which is translated as with the householder tapusa. So at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of Malas near the Malian town named Uruvelakapa. Once the Buddha robed up in the morning, taking his bowl and robe, he entered the town for alms. After the meal, on his return, he addressed Venerable Ananda. Ananda, you stay right here while I plunge deep into the great wood for the day's abiding. So while Ananda was alone, the householder Tapusa approached him, sat down to one side and said, Bhante, we lay people who partake in sensuality, we are lay people who partake in sensuality. We enjoy sensuality, we are fond of it and are pleased by it. To us lay people who partake in sensuality, who enjoy it, are fond of it and are pleased by it, renunciation seems like an abyss. I have heard that in this teaching and discipline there are very young bhikkhus whose minds leap at renunciation. Their minds, seeing it as peaceful, are confident, settled and liberated in it. It is precisely the renunciation that is dividing line between the many and the bhikkhus in this teaching and discipline. So it's like you can notice here that not just the difference in partaking in sensuality and minds leaping towards renunciation has been highlighted here. It was also highlighted by a householder. So he fully understood that the main difference, as he said, the dividing line between the many, i.e. the outsiders, the lay people, the other practices, the other teachings. So the main differences between the many, the manifold, and these bhikkhus in this teaching and discipline is precisely this renunciation. So it's not like that there were no other samanas and brahmins they were practicing ascetic practices and renunciation to some extent, but in this particular way, in this teaching and discipline, renunciation does require knowing where to apply it. So not to just turn into blind asceticism or the external form worship or similar. And to then, obviously, they would then bring understanding, as we're going to see further in the sutta, which is like why then the mind gets to see it as peaceful and it's confident and settled and liberated in it. So the layman understood that the very sensuality, so abandoning the sensuality on the right level, is the difference between everybody else and the Buddha's teaching. Because the dividing line between many and the bhikkhus is precisely this renunciation in regard to sensuality and sensual desires. So he could have added here, oh yes, and giants as well. They have all sorts of austere practices, but they still don't abandon sensuality, and that was also the Buddha's point. Saying no to things blindly, not recognizing that the root or the gateway for sensuality and your desires, it's on the level of your intentions, and then not cultivating it accordingly means even if you renounce everything to the extreme, you're still within the sensual domain. So then it goes further. Well, the Ananda says, okay, well, let's see the Buddha about this matter. So as he answers, so we shall remember it. So together they went to the Buddha, bowed and sat to one side, and then the Venerable Ananda reported this conversation, and the Buddha said, that's exactly how it is. Before my awakening, when I was still an unawakened, but intent on awakening, I too thought renunciation is good, seclusion is good, but the mind, citta, didn't see renunciation as peaceful. Didn't leap at it, and it wasn't confident, settled, nor liberated in it. So the Buddha realized, okay, so why is this the case? Why do I see on one level that renunciation is beneficial, seclusion is beneficial, but the mind is not leaping towards it? So he said, I thought, what is the cause? What is the reason why my mind doesn't see renunciation as peaceful and it doesn't leap at it? It isn't confident, settled, and liberated in it. And he realized that he hasn't seen the peril of sensuality and hasn't cultivated that. He hasn't realized the value of renunciation and didn't foster it. So that's why the mind doesn't see renunciation as peaceful and doesn't leap at it, and it isn't confident and settled and liberated in it. So this is obviously the kind of the crucial point, because he could have said million of different practices that could lead you to see peril in sensuality, because of which your mind is not leaping at it, but he didn't. He always highlighted the same thing: not having seen the danger sufficiently enough. I mean, there are many suttas in Anguttara as well that keep repeating that if the one hasn't seen the danger in it, the mind is still within the domain, not free from the hindrances, thus devoid of jhana and everything else. So, as we're going to see later on when we address the more specific questions, the point is, there is no other way of going about it. Like, nothing can magically reveal you the peril of sensuality except pondering, thinking, and trying to understand the extent of the peril of the sensuality. So that's what he said. What is the cause? Well, the cause is that I haven't seen the peril of sensuality, haven't cultivated it, hasn't realized the value. So that's why the mind doesn't see renunciation as peaceful. Then I thought, suppose that, having seen the peril of sensuality, I were to cultivate that, to not lose the context of that, to not distract myself from that, to not forget it. I suppose that having realized the value of renunciation, I were to foster it. It is possible that, seeing it as peaceful, my mind would then leap at renunciation and be confident, settled, and liberated. And so, after some time, having seen the peril of sensuality, I cultivated that. Having realized the value of renunciation, I fostered it. Then, seeing it as peaceful, my mind leapt at renunciation and was confident, settled, and liberated in it. Having thoroughly withdrawn from sensuality, having withdrawn from unbeneficial phenomena with thinking and pondering, with joy and ease born of that withdrawal, I abided, having entered upon the first jhana. So there was no middleman there. There was no, I was massaging my breath until the pleasure overwhelmed me, and that brought me to the jhana and took my mind away from sensuality. And by the way, this paragraph, this passage describes, it's just found in all the other suttas. Whenever jhanas are described, they're described as arising on account of the condition of being thoroughly withdrawn from the 5 hindrances. Obviously, sensuality being one of the chief of them. The point being, the Buddha didn't say, through practicing such concentration or such shortcut or such management technique, I took myself away from the sensuality that I knew it was bad, but my mind wasn't listening to me. No, first I basically taught my mind the peril of it. I've seen it for myself first and foremost. I've seen the extent of it, and that's when he says that he cultivated it. So one thing is to understand the peril on the level of your mano and intellect, through pondering, through abandoning of the wrong views. But another thing is for that value of that renunciation of sensuality, through seeing the peril, to sink in down to that wild animal, so that, as I said before, the wild animal will then also prefer renunciation, not sensuality. It's not enough to just counter your moods by asubha, or to tell yourself this is not worthy when you feel attracted. That's all on the level of your intellect. Yes, you should be doing it, but don't confuse that for being the practice of training the chitta. In order to train the chitta, the thing needs to sink in. So that's what it means. Having realized the value of renunciation, he fostered it. Basically, he maintained it, he protected it, he clarified it further, he sustained it until he saw that his own mind now is leaping towards it, actually wants it. And then that basically constitutes the withdrawal from the sensuality, not your reasoning and your intellect simply knowing, it's bad, thus I'm withdrawn. When the mind doesn't want to do it, you feel relieved now. Because that implicit, as other suttas say, that intimate friend that always kind of has potential to send you or cause you the danger to your life, that's gone now. Because he wants the same thing as you yourself have understood is beneficial. Then it's the first jhana. One and only way. There is no other way to jhana. through withdrawal, and the withdrawal is only possible on account of seeing the peril. Otherwise, the Buddha wouldn't have said that very thing. So he abided in the first jhana. Says, as I abide in their way, perceptions and attentions connected with sensuality besetted me, and that was an affliction for me. Suppose unease would arise for someone who is at ease, that would be an affliction for them. In the same way, perceptions and attentions connected with sensuality besetted me. So that was in the first jhana. So withdrawn from the first jhana, surmounting the domain, the entire domain of sensuality, what you're going to have in front, so to speak, will be attentions and perceptions that come from that central domain. So you're withdrawn. There is the ease of safety, the pleasure, the joy on account of safety. But the fact is, those things are there, still in front. And then he would realize, oh, this is not as peaceful as it could be. And that's exactly why he then went to the second jhana. So in other words, the joy of the first jhana, the withdrawal, the absolute wholesomeness, as the other suttas say, there is nothing unwholesome that's sort of implicit in the first jhana. It's fully divorced from everything unwholesome. But at the arm's length, there is still that annoying, afflicting sensual domain. So you're not directly afflicted by it, but it's there in front of you. And it says, those perceptions beset the mind through thinking and pondering, pretty much. So that's why he thought, how about I appease or I surmount the thinking and pondering? How about I withdraw even further? In the same sense, he realized the peril, the danger, the dissatisfaction on that level of his mano, on that mental level, on the level of understanding and the view, and then cultivated it, fostered it, thought about it, contemplated it, meditated it until it sank in into his chitta. So the chitta turned away from it. How about he repeats the same? Regards thinking and pondering as unbeneficial, as dangerous, as perilous, as not peaceful enough, until the chitta turns away from that. And it repeats the same formula. He said, why don't I appease the thinking and abide in a higher, basically surmounting, higher comprehension? He says, but my mind did not see the absence of thinking as peaceful. In the same sense, it didn't see before renunciation, i.e. the absence of sensuality, didn't see it as peaceful. He was actually afraid of it. He was actually apprehensive about it, doubtful, all sorts of ways, but he wasn't seeing it as peaceful. So you can't just tell it. You need to teach it. You need to keep showing it through your own example. That's why, again, the virtue, sense restraint is already the example you're setting for your chitta. And this is, by the way, the most accurate, the most direct practice to the development of jhana. There is no clearer method than this. Through clear pondering, thorough understanding of the danger, the peril of sensuality, the mind will leap towards renunciation. It will lean away. It will turn away from sensual desires. But not, who knows how long that will take. Because, again, different people carried, different depths of their desires, to put it that way. So some people will need longer, some people not. But the point is, you won't be able to be conveying the message of the peril, the danger of sensuality, if you're still not withdrawn even through your physical behavior and verbal behavior and the coarse mental thoughts and so on of indulgence. So that's all practice of jhana, basically. From the day one to the actual jhana, if you're doing it rightly, you are practicing the jhana at any given moment of it. So then the Buddha realized that he again needs to repeat the same type of development of the context for his mind, so that the mind starts to see the absence of thinking as peaceful. And then he repeats the same and says on a later occasion, basically, he abided in this way, and then he recognized that perception and attentions connected with thinking besetted him of that sensuality, and that was an affliction. So suppose an unease would arise for someone who is at ease. And then he realized that, okay, so now that the absence of thinking he developed, he wasn't bothered by the perceptions of sensuality like before, but now in the second jhana he realized that becomes bothersome. Again, it's not bothersome in a sense that in a sense that sensuality is perilous and bothersome. Other sutta says that first jhana is enough to become an arahant. If you stay in it long enough, in a sense of, and I don't mean like a momentary hypnotic concentration or absorption or something, it means if you cultivate that context whereby instead of sensual desires, what you're bothered is thinking and pondering of the perceptions of sensuality while you're fully withdrawn from it. You stay long enough in that setup, in that context, you will be free from sensuality eventually. But obviously the Buddha, trying to find the ultimate way out, the complete way out, leaving nothing unturned, he realized, okay, so is there higher than this? So is there higher than the second jhana now? And realized that the way to get higher was also to recognize now that the absence of thinking, the absence of sensual perceptions and thoughts that were besetting him, that too actually could be even more pleasant. And from that point of view, as in more pleasant, more agreeable, more beneficial. And from that point of view, he referred to it as an affliction. So then he thought, why don't I, with the fading away of joy, abiding equanimous, recollected, comprehending, experiencing ease with the body, abide, having entered upon the third jhana, with regard to which the noble ones say, one abides equanimous, recollected, and at ease. But again, the mind didn't see the absence of that joy of second jhana when the thinking and pondering has been stilled, hasn't seen the joy of that as peaceful. So after some time, having seen the peril of that joy, the implicit risk, he cultivated it. Having realized the value of the absence of the joy, he fostered that, seeing it as peaceful, the mind started leaping towards that. And then he was abiding, having entered upon the third jhana. Having abided in that way, perceptions and attentions connected with the joy started to beset him. He realized the affliction, that's an affliction, and then repeats the same process. Why don't I, with the giving up of ease and unease, and with the ending of those joys and upsets, surmount that domain, and with the purity of equanimity and recollection, without ease or unease, abide, having entered upon the fourth jhana. And he repeats the same. After the fourth jhana, how about I surmount all the perceptions of resistance, but the mind doesn't see the extent of infinite space as peaceful. So he first comprehended the extent of infinite space, cultivated it, abandoned any residual views that would have been preventing basically from him to for himself on the level of his mano to realize that is peaceful. And once that was all clear, doubt-free, protected that context until it sank in down to that animal, which then also agreed and realized, oh no, this is indeed peaceful, and leapt at it. That's when he entered jhana, or entered second jhana, or third, or fourth, or infinite space. So then he went further, because he could see that, well, he could still continue surmounting whatever's in front of him. So why don't I, having fully surmounted the extent of infinite space, aware that consciousness is infinite, abide, having entered that? My mind didn't see the extent of it initially. Later on he did, so he entered it. Then he thought, why don't I, having fully surmounted the extent of infinite consciousness, aware that there is nothing? So pretty much the domain, the extent of nothingness. Taught his mind how to see it as peaceful, leapt at it, entered it. Why don't I, having fully surmounted the extent of nothingness, abide, having entered upon the extent of neither perception nor perception? Same. Until it sank in, he couldn't. But then when the mind fully understood, the chitta fully understood that it is actually beneficial, then it leapt towards it. And then after a while, he realized that perceptions and attentions connected with that extent of nothingness are basically bothersome. So he thought, is there higher than this? And he realized, yes, there is higher, which is cessation of perception and feeling. After some time, surmounted the same, the mind leapt towards cessation of perception and feeling, and he basically was abiding in it. And that's when he realized that that's it. There is absolutely nothing that can be underlined by influxes from this point onwards. So if somebody were to progressively develop all the way to the cessation of perception and feeling, there is no like, oh, and now you have to spend time in it, so to speak, because if you come to that point, there will be no more influxes left underneath you, so to speak. In the first jhana, there still could be. Second jhana, there still could be. That's why he said he did not claim his full enlightenment. Oh yeah, it's the next paragraph. As long as I hadn't entered upon and withdrawn from these 9 progressive attainments of abiding in both forward and reverse order, I did not announce my supreme perfect awakening in this world with its God, Maras and Brahmas. This population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its God and humans. But when he has entered upon and withdrawn, fully understood the withdrawal principle on account of seeing the danger, mind also accepting it, leaping towards the higher domain, then he did announce that his liberation of the mind is unshakable, last birth, there is absolutely nothing that can underlie it, no asavas and anusayas, like how they're known in other suttas. So yeah, few obvious questions come up on the basis of this sutta. Like putting aside the subtler attainments, they just follow the same principle. Also, you can wrap your head around, say, the basis of infinite space and consciousness is infinite and so on. But if you haven't actually at least withdrawn yourself from sensuality into a first jhana, it's pointless to even try to figure out those higher states, because it won't be those states you're figuring out. So if we go back to the very first one, which is sensuality is an abyss, how do you basically overcome that abyss and find the safety that's completely not dependent on the body or the flesh, how the suttas would say, i.e. the 5 senses. So it's completely withdrawn from it. There is no point of contact with it, no dependence on any other slightly better sense object or similar, but it's truly withdrawn, truly safe, truly unshakable from that point of view, which is what the first jhana is. So the question is, like, then can even a householder, is there a way for him to not experience renunciation as an abyss? And of course, yes, initially when you think about, well, if a householder would think about it, it's going to be, scary. That's kind of the inevitable, say, outcome. Somebody who hasn't practiced any restraint, hasn't heard about the necessity of the virtue and restraint, or heard it like on the level of, oh, this is something optional or conditional. I could do it, sometimes, but it's not the core of the practice. It's not like the direction of the jhana. When they hear that they have to do it, yeah, they're going to be upset because they're going to blame everybody else except their own sensual desires. They do define that abyss, because that's another thing, by the way. The abyss of sensuality is not defined because it's actually or factually they're an abyss. It's defined by the strength of your desires towards those sense objects. So the stronger your desires, the bigger the abyss, if you were to even consider saying no to them. But there's no other way around it. As I said, there is no magical formula or a potion. They will just do it for you. So is there a way for householder to eventually not experience their renunciation as abyss? Absolutely. Gradual training in virtue, restraining, recognizing that level as we speak about, where your intentions that are rooted in greed, aversion, distraction, taming that, not acting out of that, that's all of that is already shrinking the abyss. But see, in order to do that, you do need, like on the level of your mana, on the level of your intellect, you need to start actually ponder and think about it, because it's like going against your entire existence, the grain of your existence. So you're going to need to have a pretty good reason to do it. And unless you would have really like sat down with it, repeatedly contemplated it and so on, no amount of reasons will sink in to that chitta, so that chitta starts to, chitta begins to be, let's say chitta wouldn't be as afraid of that abyss as it is initially when you present it with it. So for that, you do need to basically even tailor your environment, stop seeking mindless distraction and safety in the distraction through the environment. So all that needs to be reined in, honed in, and then protected, maintained. And then the chitta gets used to it, and then you bring it closer, and then chitta gets used to it. You don't do it overnight for sure, but the worst danger is to have the view that you don't have to do it. And many people do have that view. Even people that keep the virtue, they keep it in that, as I said, conditional sense. I keep it because somebody said it supports my meditation, concentration, self-hypnotic practice, so that's why I'm keeping it. But I don't keep it as a form of I'm actually training my chitta in this. I'm recognizing my intentions, taking responsibility for it. So you're not really keeping it. So initially, when somebody says no to their desires and they haven't done it before or haven't done it seriously, well, that abyss will probably even become bigger. Because again, the chitta will panic and it will try to pressure you through fear and doubt to actually don't do it and go back to it. But as I said, there is absolutely no other way, and that's even what this householder realized, Tapusa. He said, this is the very thing that differentiates everybody else from this teaching and discipline. So the sooner you start, the better, really. So kind of the next natural question would be, what would be the more specific practical things that a person who now wants to train in this, what can they do so that chitta will eventually, that wild animal will eventually leap towards renunciation itself? And as we said, virtue and restraint, not negotiable, but it's important to start emphasizing the right things, not all at once. Just say no to everything and just lock yourself in the room and no distractions. That's, you could say, by some stretch of theory, if somebody really knows what they're doing, that could possibly work. But practically speaking, you're going to overwhelm that chitta. So take on the precepts, 5 precepts with celibacy, work towards it. But at the same time, don't neglect the sense of urgency in regard to it, because you might not have your whole life ahead of you. Well, actually, you always have your whole life ahead of you. It's just that whole life might not last as long as you hope it will. So emphasizing the important, the core convergence point of sensuality, the big things, and training in regard to that, and then refining it as the time passes, as the chitta becomes more comfortable and so on. Not all at once thinking, if I just adhere to this blindly as a form of ascetic practice, pretty much, the chitta will magically become enlightened. No, understanding needs to be born out of your virtue and restraint. And no amount of willpower will just magically create understanding. So in order to do that, you need to start prioritizing the right thing. As I said already, you gotta pay attention to your environment and tailor it to the extent that you can, so that your chitta and your senses are not simply overwhelmed overwhelmed and bombarded with too many things that you just can't cope with. So sorting out your priorities. So one of you sent this in an email as a reply, and I thought I'll just read it out because it was a good list, a good checklist. So what a layperson should aim at doing is sorting out the priorities, which will certainly going to cause some hassle in the beginning due to doubt, uncertainty, fear, attachments, obligations, and so on. But you have to recognize, okay, my work begins with this. Pondering around the question, what comes first in your priorities? So is it more important to be liberated from sensuality and free from samsara once and for all, or your lay life satisfactions and joys? It's a kind of simple choice, really. It's not complex, but it's not going to be an easy choice to make, because although, even as the Buddha said, on the mental level, he understood that no, actually renunciation is good, seclusion is excellent. But the chitta was like, no, I disagree with that. I want this. So in order to then train it, as the next checklist says, is you got to establish the faith, basically. Establish the faith in these teachings in a sense of to start applying it. You're not going to have an immediate verification that sense restraint is good and seclusion is good. But if you reason clearly enough, like you don't need some high intellect to understand these principles. You just need some honesty, basically. You would see that, well, it's certainly worth a try. But if you decide to try, then you have to have faith that, like, okay, I got to try this really and properly, not half-heartedly. So faith in the application of quite a straightforward, non-intellectual instruction of training in virtue and precepts and sense restraint, yeah, that's like a pretty much the necessary condition for somebody to start doing it. So gotta read the suttas, remind yourself, learn about different aspects of renunciation, clarify it as possible so that you can actually be practicing. The next checklist is, well, accordingly, you have to be then associating with the people of the same values. Seek their advice if you're in a position to do so and follow it. Practice dana and generosity, and of course, aim towards celibacy if you're not already celibate, and include that because that's like one of the main exemplification of the entire sensual domain. So then later on, say you're celibate, you're restrained, you could then start discerning the subtler layers of the 5 hindrances and how they manifest in different ways. I mean, you could start thinking about it even now, but first things first. So all of that obviously is predicated on watching your actions by body, speech, and mind. Behavior, as we spoke before, not allowing the center stage and so on the basis of withdrawal and from the unwholesome states and further. And that's how the mind will eventually also dry up from those desires, and that's pretty much the time when you would start seeing your own chitta actually preferring it, actually leaping towards it. So, as it was said already, the only way out of this is not through, as I said, physical sensations, meditation techniques, astral projections, visualizations, or whatever your practice of meditation might be. It's through one and only path of fully seeing the danger of the sensual domain that you're living in. So, if the Buddha himself, with the greatest paramis and everything, could not do it any other way, I would be probably, as I said, you don't even need a great intellect and reasoning to see that, okay, so then if he couldn't do it, who am I to talk about doing some other way, quicker way, or a different type of jhana way? Like, that's what I mean. Like, if you're honest, you realize, okay, so if he laid it out, and again, it's not hard to understand. It's just hard to stick to it because people would lack faith in application, and then choose pretty much every other excuse to dismiss the application or the speaker who gave them that application or the suttas or the Buddha and do what they want to do, which is basically stay in the sensual domain because they don't want to develop and face the abyss. So that's, again, I mean, I've been already mentioning it, but it's good to say it clearly. So like when, question, so could somebody still hypothetically practice concentration, the way it's being taught today? Can they practice concentration to encourage, to speed up, to speed up the leaping of the chitta towards renunciation faster? And it's an obvious categorical absolutely no. Because whatever you are concentrating will be the object of your own mano, and it won't be the chitta behind it. So if there would be a magical object that can take the chitta in the background, the animal that you're not even seeing, towards renunciation, well, the Buddha would have outlined it. So the closer to the object of your concentration you can get is the object of your thoughts of thinking and pondering about the peril of sensuality. If people try and argue and say, well, the physical sensations are not sensual, how can they not be sensual if they come from your body, which is one giant field of touch? Doesn't matter how you try to spin it. Or breath is not sensual. Is it felt in the body? Yes. I mean, even the suttas say breath is inseparable from the body. It's bodily, that's why it's kaya sankara. If it's connected with your body, it's connected with the flesh. There is no other way around it. If people say, well, it doesn't harm anybody. Well, lots of things don't harm anybody. Self-pleasuring doesn't harm anybody technically, yet we all know how unwholesome that would be from somebody who wants to be celibate and keep the precepts. So it's just, as I said, if you are honest, you will see that the reasoning in defending sensations or breath meditations of pleasure, they will take your mind away from it, doesn't hold up. And when the Buddha did teach Anapanasati, it was on the level of understanding and using the breath to outline your own body from which you are pretty much already thoroughly or sufficiently withdrawn. Instead of concentrating, instead of anesthetizing yourself basically through the common practices of meditation, invest the effort in calming down your environment, calming down your engagements with it, calming down the pulls and pressures that you experience on account of it. Go and sit down quietly, but not out of that duty that as a Buddhist I must do this concentration because otherwise I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And sit down quietly and then think and ponder to the full extent of why sensuality is dangerous and why your own mind doesn't want to turn away from it. And do it pretty much until the mind turns away from it. And that will be your jhana. So the only way to encourage your chitta to turn, the wild animal to turn towards renunciation, is that you yourself fully understand the benefit of it. So that's why I said the first reason your the chitta is not turning towards it is because you yourself have not clarified and understood the benefits for yourself on the level of your own mind, mano, on the level of your own intellect. So let's say somebody does develop that, householder, perfectly possible. If he's celibate and withdrawn, and he enters the first jhana, then as other householders in the suttas existed, became skilled in all 4 jhanas, because following the same progression. And also, once say like you surmount the central domain, yes, it will require that diligence of bringing up the context of the peril of the thinking and pondering of the first jhana that's being besetted by the perceptions of sensuality and so on. But it won't be as much of a chore as it was overcoming the abyss. So that's why, the faith would have already been thoroughly confirmed by then. So once somebody's in the first jhana, they can easily continue practicing the same thing and get even closer to that full enlightenment and removal of all the underlying tendencies and so on. So the principle between that progression, I already described it through this when we read the sutta, and it's the one, you can say you progress upwards only through surmounting what's in front. So there is absolutely no other way to it, or other shortcut or similar. So this might bring up an idea of the foreground and the peripheral in your mind. And theoretically, that is true. But practically, foreground and the peripheral, say when you think about it, will always carry an implicit intention there and then for you that would be implying that I must surmount the foreground by including all the peripheral. And that intention needs to be included. But see, that's not something you can just attend as a foreground. So yes, foreground and the peripheral, whatever that is, at whatever stage you might be, and then recognize the implicit imperative in it. I must surmount this, and include it, not follow it to surmount it, to surmount foreground and peripheral, because then you're still acting out of a hindrance. But obviously a lot more can be said about that. Maybe we can do another sutta reading. So somebody asked, would it be correct to say that the mind cannot understand, the chitta cannot understand the peril of a less wholesome state and the value in a more wholesome state without being actually fully, thoroughly first withdrawn from the less unwholesome state? And yes, that's absolutely correct. And that withdrawal is the necessary basis for actual successful and productive understanding and contemplation of, sensuality is bad, or thinking and pondering is a nuisance from the point of view of the second jhana. So first you need to withdraw yourself from sensuality physically, stop giving into it, in order that you first be able to understand how it's not beneficial and how it's perilous, in order for then that knowledge to sink down to the chitta. as we said before, you can't contemplate the peril of sensuality unless you're first withdrawn from sensuality. It's just going to stay on a completely abstract level, and it can actually lead you astray even more, because while engaging with sensuality, you think you're contemplating the peril, and in other words, that which could have actually served as a peril becomes something you're attracted to now, because you've been acting towards it while you were thinking the asubha thoughts and so on. So the peril is on the level of the core of sensuality, the core of giving into those desires of that wild animal is what keeps the wild animal wild. And any pain you would have experienced, any pain you will experience, any pain that you could imagine you could experience, any suffering basically, any pain, any dukkha, that is the sole reason for it. It's the wilderness of that animal, i.e. craving. It's not the circumstances, it's not the highway robbers chopping your limbs, it's not losing the loved ones, it's the sole thing is the wilderness of that animal. And once you are very clear about that, the abyss will disappear. Sure, you might still get careless, as some of the noble disciples did in the suttas, because the abyss has disappeared. Because to that extent, the animal has seen, oh, that's where all the problems come from. You chase after sensuality, you protect what's yours, so to experience that peace which always is undermined by your very chase, by the very pressure towards the chase, by the craving behind it. So that's like the most direct thing, direct principle behind the peril of sensuality that you can see. But as I said, one thing is you hear this, you think about it, you make sense of it, and another thing is to actually start doing it. So, in order to discern the domain of sensuality, in order for mind to leap away from it, you need to not just stop giving in to the contradictory acts of following your desires or ill will and so on. You also have to stop resisting what comes up when you sort of restrain your mind, when you round up, when you say no to desires, the pressures, the abyss that come up, you have to stop resisting it as well, in a sense of you have to stop being averse towards it, because again, that keeps you connected to it. So that's why the whole non-resistance towards foreground and peripheral and the intention to act out of it needs to be thoroughly developed. But see, that non-resistance that we talk about, enduring on the right level we talk about, which fosters that resistance, that can only be done once you round up the mind. Once you actually do have some aggregate of virtue and sense restraint. Because, if you don't, saying, oh, I won't resist anything, basically almost automatically means, oh, you go back to sensuality. No, you gotta resist things because the initial starting point is too much of basically flowing, going along with the flow. So you gotta resist the flow. You gotta resist the current. And then the result of that, okay, now I should not resist that. And that's how you find the middle way, the balance, so to speak. And then, somebody also asked, technically speaking, one could leave the household life today, become a monk, give up, the household life, belongings, family, and so on, but not necessarily renounce sensuality on the level of their desires, exactly. Or still resist it and think that just through doubling down in the resistance and ascetic practices and following the sense of duty or whatever else, they will just power through it. It's like, no. So even if somebody, say, technically somebody could be a monk, would have been, or a nun, given up household life, given up family, and still very much remain connected to sensuality, which means still very much be exposed to that abyss. Because it still hasn't been addressed. The mind still hasn't been trained to get used to it, stop fearing it, stop being anxious in the face of it, and then it's always going to be there as a potential. So even if you'd never experience abyss, it's because you never said no to those desires on that level, or because you're an arhat. So which one of those two is? Well, you can guess. Pretty much covers the basic principles of this sutta. As I said, I didn't want to go into neither perceptions nor no perceptions and so on, and just inundate you with theoretical ideas and knowledges, while the most practical principle that sits right in front of your face could be developed with the actual fruits and the benefit of it. So that's why I chose to stick to that.